a reporter for UConn women's basketball, which I've done the last 2 seasons. And the season before that, I was also a sideline reporter for the UConn men's team. But in addition to that, I am an anchor for our nightly sports recap show. It's called Sports Night. It airs at 11 p.m. Eastern, and it also replays throughout the night and the following morning. We cover everything New York sports, college, pros, and that includes UConn as well, since they're a partner of SNY's. And what else do I do? Before COVID-19, we had a couple other studio shows that were during prime time, like 5 o'clock and 5:30, that I was a part of. Since COVID, we have actually eliminated some of our in-studio programming, and we do a lot of digital series now, which I think is a good thing overall, because obviously digital is the present and the future. And so, I started hosting a lot of segments from home, doing a lot of interviews from home. And it's like everything, it was an adjustment, but there's definitely some perks to it as well. Just like being able to do things like this, where, I might not physically be able to get up and drive to Connecticut for a meeting all the time, but I could, hop on a Zoom call. And I think we've realized that a lot of people are accessible to us that might not have been otherwise, like athletes and other people of interest for interviews or series that we're doing. So that's one positive out of the the chaos of COVID. But I would say, in the fall I host actually an NFL show called Place Your Bets on Sunday mornings. So we go around the league, talk all about every single game, every spread in every game, the storylines, fun stuff, prop bets, whatever we come up with. So I would say those are like my three main things: our sports night, Place Your Bets, and UConn women's basketball. But again, prior to COVID, because we cover all these New York sports, we would send reporters to a lot of different games. I used to cover Knicks games, Nets games. I wouldn't typically cover Giants and Jets because we have like an NFL insider that typically does that. But I would go to a lot of Yankees games, actually. That was great. For those of you who don't know, SNY is also the home of the Mets. So we broadcast most Mets games, and therefore we have a specific Mets reporter. So I wouldn't be the person that would be covering Mets games usually. But yeah, we have representation there. And then other random things too, like I remember a highlight was after the US women's national team won their last I guess it was World Cup. Yeah, it was a year or two ago. Like I got to go and interview them when they came back to New York. So it could be like anything really that's happening in the New York area, like we would go and cover. So that's one thing that I'm missing in COVID. And I'm hoping that I can get back to covering some more live events. I didn't get to make the trip to the women's Final Four this year. That's a trip that I'm hoping to make next year. But yeah, that's pretty much what I do. And that was a really long answer for your first question, so apologies.
No worries at all. So obviously though, like New York is one of the premier, if not the top, sports market for TV in the country. It's not the top market for teams, obviously that's Boston, but
oh my God, shots fired out of the gate.
Right. I mean, I had to. Could you just walk us through like your career path to where you are today?
So first of all, that dig hits particularly hard because I am New Jersey born and raised. So I happen to be from this area. I grew up about an hour and a half outside of Manhattan. And, how I got here, it's the one thing I want to stress and you guys have had a lot of guests, I'm sure, and everyone will tell you a different path, but I always say there's no blueprint in this industry. There's a million different ways you could go, and sometimes it's just not a clear path, and you have to kind of get creative and figure out a way to get to where you want to be. And so with that being said, um, I'll start from the very beginning, I suppose. Um, and I just want to start also by breaking down like what I do. There's the content aspect of it, and then there's the skill aspect. So for me, sports is the niche that I'm in. It's the sort of the thing that I'm super passionate about. So there was on one hand, getting experience in sports related things, and then on the other hand, the skill, which is journalism, and getting experience in different forms of that. So, growing up, I was interested in sports, but I wasn't necessarily sure that that was a viable career path for me. And then, of course, when you're young, you don't know necessarily what's going to happen or what you're going to end up liking. But when I was in high school, I took a journalism elective, actually. Started writing for my school paper, and then as a senior in high school, became an editor of that paper. And that's when I realized that storytelling was my thing. And I wanted to tell stories, and I liked just talking to different people. And I say interviewing them, but just having conversations with people. I was genuinely curious, which I think is a quality or a characteristic, I should say, that, you want to have if you're in this field. And, I was outgoing. I just liked gathering that information, having those interactions, and then telling the story. So I realized I wanted to study communications, media. I actually started my college career at a community college in New Jersey, where there was a scholarship program that allowed me to save a lot of money. So I did that, and then that's when I kind of started pivoting from print to broadcast, because I realized that, again, I like the interaction, um, the outgoing personality. I liked sort of presenting myself, and I I liked just like, again, talking to different people, interviewing, and then I just kind of gravitated toward that, and I worked with the TV station on campus, the radio station on campus, and I also still continued to write for the online newspaper that they had. Transferred to a four-year school, Ramapo College of New Jersey, and continued to do all of that. And then also got some experience outside of school as well. One of my first jobs was writing for the New Jersey Herald, which was a local paper near where I grew up, and I covered high school sports, anything you could think of, football, tennis, field hockey, uh, just pretty much whatever I could. And so that was kind of my first taste in the sports realm, but I still wasn't convinced. I was like, how the hell am I going to get a job working in sports? But whatever. I kind of wanted to leave all options open. And when I was in school, I landed an internship at WABC TV in New York. That was like my first taste of the TV realm, writing for TV, producing, sort of gathering all the information and the documentation, everything, to make sure that our stories were, accurate and well told. We had proof for everything. And I worked 5 days a week, for $10 a day was my stipend. I think now the industry has changed a lot, where internships are for the most part paid, but at the time you would get college credit for the internship, which is what I did. And then I graduated, and I didn't know exactly, how to break in per se, but I got my first job was actually in a marketing department, where I did like in-house stuff. And you see that a lot more now, because a lot of companies and brands, they're creating sort of their own content and telling their own story. It's not as closed off as it used to be with media, right? Like we're all our own media creators. And so being in a marketing department, I got to, I actually sort of honed shooting and editing video, which is not something I do now necessarily all the time, but it's something that I think is great to have a good understanding of, just so you know how everything works, whether you're in front of the camera or behind it. I used to like write blogs. I used to even like take some photos, do some social media stuff. I was also, it was actually a ski mountain. So I was like a snow reporter as well. I would like wake up in the morning and write the snow report blog and do videos for YouTube and all that stuff. So that was kind of a good stepping stone of just like getting different professional experience and again, honing that storytelling. And then I kind of bounced around for a bit. There was a period where I was actually like just freelancing for a bunch of random places. And then I'd say a breakthrough for me was a radio gig that I got. It was part-time. Again, $12 an hour, so not nearly enough to make a living. But I, had saved up money and I kind of figured it out. But I worked there for a year. It was a radio station where I did local news reports and anchoring. I would go to like public meetings and interview like the mayor of whatever town and, local officials and do that. And then right around that time, I actually, like a couple buddies that I went to high school with were doing this podcast. They asked me to come on every week and it was sports related. And sitting down with them every week and just sort of discussing sports topics, that's kind of what like made it all click for me when I realized like sports is what I really enjoy talking about. And I remember, again, there were other signs, like I said, when I was in college working for the Herald covering sports. And even when I interned at ABC in New York, like I remember the reporter that I worked under saying to me, like, you need to cover sports. Like, what are you doing? Because I was like talking about whatever Giants game had happened like recently or something to do with the Giants. It was whatever. And I was just like, yeah, okay, whatever. But like I said, it wasn't until that podcast that I that I'm like, you know what, I gotta see if I can find a way to get into the sports world. So there was an opening for an update anchor for Sirius XM radio for sports channels. And at the time I knew that I had radio experience from my other job and I had anchored and I had done reporting and all that. It wasn't sports, but I still felt like the experience was comparable. So I recorded a demo, submitted my resume and whatnot. And I also found out who the hiring manager was. Something I'm sure to like emphasize in today's world is that like so many job openings are very impersonal. And I think, I think if you can get an interview, if you can get in front of somebody, like that's the hardest part. So once you get there, I think, you have a really good chance at getting the job, right? But when you're applying to all these jobs online and they have hundreds of applicants and, a lot of people have comparable experience, it's really hard to get that interview. So it really helps to find out somebody who's a contact that you can reach out to directly, that you can follow up with. And I was lucky enough to know of somebody who worked at Sirius XM, and I just asked them to find out if, who the hiring person was. Then I kind of put two and two together, found their email, reached out, and then they invited me in to do an audition. So that again, and that's not to say like, again, like if you're not qualified for the role, like obviously, that knowing who the hiring manager is isn't going to help you, but I'm just saying like as a way to sort of get your resume to jump out and show that you are qualified. That was kind of my thinking there. So anyway, I went and auditioned and it was looking back, I'm not sure there was ever a more nerve-wracking experience in my life, because I knew that it would change the trajectory of my career one way or the other, because it was New York, because it was a national radio platform. And luckily I mean, I didn't know how I did in the audition. Like, I remember coming home and like literally crying. Like, I called my mom crying because I was like, I don't have no idea how I did. Um, but eventually, weeks later, they contacted me and gave me the job. So I was happy about that. Now, again, this is a part-time thing. Like, if you guys are taking journalism classes and stuff, I'm sure you've heard by now that um, getting a full-time job, especially early on, is difficult. And so you kind of have to be prepared to take the jobs that are, not necessarily having benefits, not necessarily having good pay or great hours or anything like that. But, obviously, if you're passionate about what you do and you like what you do, that's okay. And also, depending on your priorities, like for me, I I was happy enough just to barely be able to pay my rent or like make ends meet. That was fine with me at the time. Now, again, like everybody's situation is different. Sometimes people prioritize other things, but for me, I was okay with that, with getting in the door, getting the experience. And then once you're there, it's about building credibility and also building a network. So credibility as in, I'm a quote unquote established. I can say I'm an anchor for Sirius XM radio, right? That gives me a little bit, not a ton, but like gives you just a little bit of clout, to sort of get to the next thing or to tack on to what you're already doing. So I worked at Sirius XM for years, but then as I built my network, I grew to having other jobs as well. So I started at Sirius XM radio. Then I started working at NBC Sports Radio as well. Worked both of those places at the same time. Then I started working at a network called Fantasy Sports Network, who, like, the director of content at the time had known people at Sirius XM. And so, like, you start to, again, like, you build this network. And like, I found out about the NBC Sports Radio job because a colleague, a former colleague at Sirius XM, heard there was an opening and all these things. So once you get into a place where you meet enough people that you have this network, all of a sudden other opportunities start to emerge. And then also at the same time, you are getting the practice, you're getting the experience, you're building your skill set, and you're building a bit of a reputation, hopefully a good one. And for me, what I wanted to be my reputation was, works her ass off, is hopefully like pleasant to be around, nice to people, generally not a pain in the ass, like willing to take shifts, like if managers, need somebody, like willing to work, um, and also putting out good quality work, right? So getting there and just doing my best every day. And I think because of those things, I think that's a big reason why some of these other opportunities started to present themselves, and also putting myself out there. So when I say like building a network, it wasn't like this easy thing. This is an everyday thing, and it's not only how you conduct yourself, but it's also going out of your way to meet people, and people that are in positions to help somehow facilitate your path, that are in decision making positions. Like, I remember when I was at Sirius XM, I would mostly work nights and weekends. Now, anybody who made any decisions for Sirius XM was not really in the building at night or on weekends. So sometimes I would literally show up at Sirius XM during the week, like in the middle of the day, even if I wasn't working. And I would just show up and I would go upstairs and I'd do a lap and I would see my boss and I would just give him a wave just so he knew I was there. I would stop and get a coffee. I would mingle with people. Like, I would make myself known. And that might sound kind of crazy, but that was just how I operated. And I would go like like the holiday party, right? Like you don't think that's a big deal, but like for me, the first year that I worked at SiriusXM, I was like, I'm going to that holiday party and I'm going to introduce myself to the head of sports content. And that's what I did. And that was the first time we ever had a conversation. And then like, months later, eventually I was like reached out to that same individual and said like, hey, like I'm really interested in sort of progressing in my career and in my role. Like, how can I do that? And I actually just randomly asked for a meeting and sat down and like had a candid conversation with that person. I would go to like, if there was any like random, events, like networking events, whatever, like I would show up, I would be there and I would be shaking hands and I would be meeting as many people as I could. And one of those such events is where I met the director of content at what was then called Fantasy Sports Network. Now it's called Sports Grid. But at that, like at Fantasy Sports Network, that's where I got my first like experience being on camera on a daily basis for TV and digital video. So I am 100% certain that without that role, I wouldn't have been approached by SNY ever, because they would have had nowhere to see me. And, I also think like when certain opportunities arise, sometimes I tell myself like sometimes the hardest thing to do is just getting up and going. Like stop thinking, just be there, right? Like just get there. And I'll give you an example of a story. Like, so again, I told you, like I meet the director of content at Fantasy Sports Network, hopefully make some sort of an impression. And at some weeks or months later, I don't remember the exact time, but he reached out to me. It was, I think, it was like a random weekday. I remember I was exhausted. I was sitting on my couch. I probably worked late the night before. I don't know what. I was not like showered or anything. And he emails me. He didn't have my number or anything. And he was like, hey, like, I know this is crazy and last minute, but I have this show that I'm screen testing for and somebody didn't show up and I need to, fill this spot. Like, can you get here in like a half hour? And then he was in Midtown Manhattan. I was at my apartment in New Jersey. And part of me was like, I can't get there. I'm not like dressed. I'm not showered. I'm not presentable. Like all these reasons why like I couldn't be there. And like I was afraid, I wasn't prepared, right? Like I didn't know what the topics would be or anything like that. And I'm kind of going back and forth with him and I'm like, look, like I can get there, but. And he was like, look, if you get here, like it'll be fine. And I believed him and I raced around my apartment like the Tasmanian devil. I called an Uber that I couldn't afford. I grabbed a snack to eat on the car ride on the way there. And I'm simultaneously looking up every sports news story of the day just to make sure that I happen to know whatever's going on. And I showed up and I did this like screen test thing. And the host of the show afterwards was like, yeah, I don't know what the producer was thinking, but like, I want you to be on this show. And I was like, awesome. And you know what? That wasn't a paid show. So I did this show every week and it was a panel show and it was a great time and great experience. And I all of a sudden learned this other skill that I didn't even necessarily know that was in me, which was having opinions and having takes and having more conversational stuff as opposed to just reporting on what was happening. And like I said, even though I didn't get paid for it, it was all of this experience. And then I'm almost certain, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe shortly after I cut up a reel of myself on this show, which was like a minute long. And it was just like funny little phrases here and there and takes and different things from that show. And I posted it to my Instagram and maybe Twitter and wherever. And shortly after that, I was contacted by SNY. So I would never have thought that that would happen. And that's brings me to my next point, which is I always say, sometimes your dream shows up in a form you don't expect. So I didn't know how I was going to get where I am now. I didn't know that it was going to be radio first. I didn't know that radio was going to lead to, you know, uh, this other TV startup sort of network. I didn't know any of this. You just like, you have to just be open to like these different opportunities and weigh out every decision and the information at hand in the moment and try your best to navigate all these things. And um when I got the call from SNY that they had booked me for my first show, it changed my life, because all of a sudden you talk about credibility, now it's another level, right? And it was nerve-wracking because I was like, okay, now I got in the door, now I have to execute and perform. So it was by no means like, it never beyond that has it been easy, because being consistently strong, that's one of the most difficult things about this business, is like, you do 5 shows a week. And I do somewhat equate it to being an athlete, actually. Like, you play however many games a week. How do you consistently bring it every single time? And I admit, some shows are better than others, some interviews are better than others, but I always try to maintain like a level of performance. And so I worked then at SNY for about 9 months as a freelancer. So again, I was still working, like I was working at SNY, I was still working SiriusXM and Fantasy Network, and I was still doing all those things and juggling and making ends meet. And then after about 9 months, they offered me the full-time gig, which was a huge goal of mine. And by the way, I was 29 years old when that offer came in. So I say all this to say that, it might take a while and it might be a circuitous route, and you might not always be sure. And also, however it works out is okay. Like, I always told myself, again, and there were times I was flat out poor, like couldn't even pay my rent. And there were times where I was just like, as long as I can just get to the next month or whatever, like I'm cool with it. Like, I was content with what I was doing. I was content with building and building and building. Again, that might not be for everybody, and that's totally fine. Like, whatever you decide to start doing, I just hope that if I could give any sort of advice, it's that, like, whatever your heart's telling you, like, it's fine. Like, it's fine, and you'll figure it out. And even if I had left sports or left broadcasting and took a full-time job somewhere else and had more security and started to do other things that were maybe more important on my list of priorities, that's fine too. So, like, don't compare yourself to anybody in that sense, and always do what makes you happy and what, is going to make you feel fulfilled. So yeah, that's, I'm rambling again, but just some anecdotes, that I picked up.
No, it's good. It's always helpful. Like, it's helpful to hear pieces of advice, but I think it's more helpful to hear like how that actually ties into, your journey. So that was great. I really appreciate it. And I want to open up the floor to all of you guys if you have any questions. I have more to ask if nobody does, but I want to give everyone the opportunity to either unmute or type in the chat and ask Maria anything that you guys want to know.
I was just wondering if you could take us through non-COVID times, like a day in the life of a sideline reporter, like what your prep work is like, what interview questions you prepared, what that sort of looks like for UConn basketball, for example.
Sure. And I'll try to be a lot more brief than I've been in my prior answers. But so I always say, whatever you're preparing for, sideline, a hosting gig, anchoring, anything, it starts with having a base knowledge and idea of everything that's going on. So you make it part of your daily routine. Like, I wake up and I'm like, what's going on with UConn, right? I'm looking at the Hartford Courant. I'm looking at all the different local papers. I'm looking at social media. I'm making sure that I'm up on everything. So that's number one. Then it's sort of identifying, as a sideline reporter, you want to have some stories sort of in your back pocket. And for me and our team at SNY, it's important to have some of our exclusive stories. So stories that you're not going to necessarily read about in another paper or see it online in a press conference or a video clip or whatever. So you might have like no part of it, but I want to try to give you a nugget that you haven't heard. So I'll identify like a few stories that are intriguing to me, and it's usually like either it could be something to do with coach and something he's specifically doing, or it could be related to a specific player, and I have maybe 4 or 5 of those in mind, and I try to sort of follow my nose and see what I can get from that. So prior to COVID, I would go to shoot around in the morning, which is a big key of what I do, because that's typically when I could speak to players and find out more about whatever the story is that I'm trying to chase. So number one, I can see shoot around and I can see if anything comes to mind. Maybe I notice something that they're working on. Maybe I hear the coach say something, I pick up on it, whatever. Just kind of being there and paying attention and seeing if there's anything significant. Then I would talk to usually 2 or 3 players at shoot around and coach. Now, sometimes coach will come over and, you know, it's not necessarily me asking him questions. He'll just kind of like talk about whatever he feels like talking about, which is fine too. And I'm like furiously like taking notes, and I'm trying to like, you know, make sure I get everything. And or sometimes he'll say something and then something will come to mind and I'll ask him something. And then with the players, that's more about me having specific questions, because, you know, coaches, like they talk for a living, like they're used to media and all that. And players, especially at UConn, are incredibly well versed with the media and used to it too, because they're basically like professional athletes with the type of sort of media access that they get. But that being said, you know, I still have to prompt them in the right way to get them to, you know, give me some information. But also along those lines, a big part of what I do is relationships, building a rapport. I always say that the best content comes out of athletes who sort of are somewhat familiar with you. They maybe don't know you, but they kind of know who you are. Hopefully they sort of trust you to a point where they recognize you, they can feel like they can be comfortable in talking to you. So, you know, interviews always start before the actual interview, in my opinion, because, you know, you want to introduce yourself, you want to sort of joke around a little bit, keep it light, you know, make people comfortable. And that's one thing I would say that has been more difficult with COVID, them not seeing me all the time in person. I think it's a little harder to build that rapport. This team had a lot of freshmen on it, and most of them, none of them I've met in person at this point. They can see my face on Zoom for like a little bit. So I think at this point, they kind of know who I am now, or maybe they would recognize me if I came on a Zoom, but it's certainly not the same as meeting them in person and sort of bullshitting with them a little bit, like after a shoot around or whatever. So having the relationship, that's a big thing. And then just to sum it up, gosh, I'm talking so long, but I would say that get there early before a game. Like I go back to my hotel room, I would sift through all my notes. I would put together my strongest storylines. I'd kind of sum them up, write them all out. I would prep with my producer for pregame to find out what topics they want to discuss. Then I would prep with my game producer about the stories that we think are most important to focus on. And then depending on how the game unfolds is how we would decide which stories to use. You know, for instance, if I had prepared a story about, you know, we'll just use Paige as an example, and then she goes out in the first quarter and she's lighting it up and she's making all these shots, and it's like, all right, let's talk about Paige, right? but you have to be prepared, right? Because if that doesn't happen, what's the story that you're going to talk about that's relevant? We figure out which of those stories to, again, have in the back pocket. Then we also we prep. Questions are usually like more in the moment, and so as the half is coming to a close and as the game is coming to a close, I'm identifying the key points in the game. I'm sort of thinking critically about how I would want to ask the questions, and then I usually run them by my producer just to make sure he's thinking along the same lines. He might say, well, how about this instead? And we'll go back and forth and we'll solidify sort of what we want to ask. And then, so that way he knows where I'm going. So, you know, he can always bail me out if something goes awry, but yeah. And, I think that's pretty much it. It's so like, it's hard to condense everything, but there's obviously a lot of prep and thought that goes into it. But thanks for the question.
Danny, I think I saw your hand going up too.
Yeah. So as people that are trying to get into the industry either as a producer or reporter, you want to find a way to stand out. You said, as you said, there's thousands of people that apply to jobs, so you want your name to rise above the rest of the pack. So what are some things that you see from people that make them stand out? If they're just coming into the industry, you're like, wow, they're doing really good work. And what are some things that you did in your applications that you think got you the job, in your reporting or with whatever you were applying to? What are some things that you think you did well that people saw and hired you for?
There's so many things. Like I said, I think getting in the room is important. So however you can make that happen and get creative with it. I think at that point, you have to trust in your knowledge and who you are. It's not just the words on the page of your resume. So you have to present, what it is about you that makes you qualified. Before you get to any of that, I obviously think that social media is important, as it's like your own sort of visual. It's like a reel and a resume and everything all in one. So there are certainly other ways to have a presence without having social media, but I think in this business it's very important. Be careful about what you post, what you tweet, but have it be representative of you and say something important, say something meaningful. There's nothing wrong with posting pictures or tweets without substance, but I always say, like, one of the first things that your people are probably going to do is look you up on Instagram or Twitter. So like, make sure whatever you're saying is substantive and is reflective of who you are. I would say, and to that end, I'm sure most of you are, again, understanding that you're in control of some of your own content and getting creative and things like that. So think about what exactly you want to do and think about how you can showcase your skill and how you're good at that. So whether it be, posting a minute video where it's just like a take on something, or engaging in conversations, or tweets or whatever, that's part of it. Like I said, I think having an impression and just generally being a good person, working hard, helping your people solve problems is a good thing. I'll share a quick story. There's a woman who works here at SNY who, when she was an intern, I don't think I knew her name per se, but I would see her around. And at the end of the internship, she handed me a written note, a personalized written note. And I thought it was so sweet and thoughtful. And I remembered her from then on. And then she ended up getting hired here as a part-time producer. So things like that, just to be memorable. I always try to be memorable. And I know we're coming up on 6:45 here, but like, if you get in front of anybody for 30 seconds, how do you make them remember you? So to me, like, it's not like it's not just like, hey, how are you? And again, sometimes you don't always have time, but it's like just finding some way, and you won't know until you're in the moment, but to make an impression and to maybe make them laugh or whatever it is, like have them remember who the hell you are. Like that's I think important. So that's a matter of standing out, I guess. But beyond that, before any of that, it's obviously putting the work in. It's doing any sort of experience you can, any sort of part-time gig, any sort of internship, co-op, any sort of class that gets you any sort of experience in general, and do as much as you possibly can. Like anything and everything that you have time and are able to do. That's the first thing. So thanks for the question.
Thank you.
If anybody else has questions, Maria, I first want to ask you, do you have like 10 more minutes? Do you have?
I do have, I have some time if anyone else has questions.
Okay, so it's 6:45. So if you want to go, please go. But I want, like, if other people have questions, Catherine, I saw your hand up. We appreciate you staying an extra few minutes.
No problem.
Hi, I was just gonna ask if you could speak to like the challenges that you face being a woman in the industry, like I'm not even like, let's say in field yet, but just experiencing it in the classroom and like other things, there's moments when you like don't want to entertain it, but then there's moments when it's there. So it's like the challenges there or learning how to navigate. So if you've experienced something like that and like what helps you to just have that level playing field.
Sure. So I'm, as you can probably tell about me already, I'm naturally going to bounce around a little bit, but lately, and I mean, like I'm somewhat established in my career. I'm in a secure job and all that, but lately, I think what's been the biggest challenge is trying to maintain sort of a level head when you see things that are just not right and that are, unequal. And I think we saw a lot of examples with that most recently with the NCAA tournament and March Madness. And, it's, I think for people that are passionate about this sort of thing, sometimes it's hard to just like, it's hard not to get angry sometimes. And, but I think it's really, really important for everybody to like keep their heads, because you're not going to get anywhere by sort of barking at people. It's about rising above and sharing the facts and all of that. So I would say that would be one challenge I've faced recently, where like I was starting to see certain things and research, and I'm just like, God, this is annoying. But it was like, all right, how can I sort of use my platform to, what little platform I have, by the way, I'm not like, I don't have like a bajillion followers or anything like that, but to have meaningful conversations and try to work that out. But earlier on in the industry, like particularly with my career, I'll just say I've had mostly positive experiences. But I do think like when I first got hired at SiriusXM, first of all, I was the youngest anchor. And out of, I want to say about 20 anchors, I think 2 of us were women. And none of the full-timers were women. And when I was in the newsroom, at any given moment, I was like 9 times out of 10 the only woman in the newsroom. But that being said, I think it was maybe a little bit intimidating at first, but once I showed that I was there to work, that, I knew what I was talking about because I worked and worked and worked, and they got to know me and everything, I felt like my credibility and the reason I belonged there was apparent. And if anybody else thought anything otherwise, then that's on them. But it was clear that I was able to do the job. And, obviously not at first, I wasn't as experienced as most of the people there, but it was clear that I was driven and working and noticeably improving and all of that stuff. So I think once people see that, I don't think there's like, unless you're just a flat out bad person, like there's nothing that you're going to criticize somebody for. And I just think one thing that I've learned in my life is that, the more diversity, the better, because especially in media, ethically, media have a tremendous responsibility to tell stories, and you're only going to tell the story more accurately and with more context and a better understanding with more diverse perspectives, contributing to that story. And especially working in TV, there's so many aspects that make the show go, the producers, the editors, that talent, like so many things that it's like all of those people have a chance to make a small mark on this program. And again, if you have diverse perspectives in there, it's just going to make the product better. So, yeah, I guess those are like a couple of examples. But I think if you work hard and you keep your head down and you show what you can do, like it's all good. Thanks for the question, by the way.
Other questions? All right. Well, Catherine, I really like that one too. I mean, obviously, it's something we're always trying to work on, improve on. And like at the end of the day, the stories we tell they probably tend to be representative of who we are. So, the more representative we are, the better
Right.
stories we'll tell for everybody. So it's
For
always
sure.
important to keep that in mind.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.